The title of today's, I was about to say talk, but I think it's going to be more an event, is Choosing Canada, Why Italians Are Choosing to Move to Canada in the 21st Century. And it's kind of fitting in the theme that Gina gave me, or the biographical note that Gina gave us, that you can also find on the website, is in fact starts with her parents who chose to move to Canada. Gina Valle's parents were born in a small town in Calabria. Before they were 25 years of age, Domenico and Giuseppa moved to Canada and built a new life. Gina understood the responsibility that came with that decision. After completing her PhD at OISE, here at the very own University of Toronto, Gina went on to found Diversity Matters, where she focuses on making Canada a more equitable society for all. She's a writer, producer, editor, director, and educator. She's a past board member of the Privy Council appointment, the Canadian Race Relations Foundation, and the Advisory Council of Omni TV. She is a director at Villa Charities, where she's chair of culture. In 2023-2024, as mentioned, Dr. Valle was a Goggio Fellow at the University of Toronto. In 2024, she launched her book, Echoes of Growing Up Italian. In recognition of her work in diversity, Gina is a recipient of the Ordine al Merito and the Queen Diamond and Platinum Jubilee medals from the federal government. Domenico and Giuseppa's legacies live on in Gina and in Gina's children. So please join me to welcome Gina. And
thank you, Professor. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Sonili, and thank you to the Iacobucci Center for the invitation to be here. It's always a little bit of a crazy time of year for everyone, the end of November, moving into the month of December. So you're brave souls to be here, and thank you so much for your time. It's a crazy world out there, so hopefully for the next hour or two, we can just sit back, relax, and share some findings of the research that I conducted this past year, thanks to the fellowship that I was able to, that I worked under in order to collect the research. So just so everyone knows, today's session is being live streamed. It will be available on the Iacobucci Center YouTube channel. And today we're going to depart a little, even though my training is in academia, we're going to depart a little bit from a lecture style, and we're going to make it somewhat interactive. So I'll be asking for some of you to do a very short reading. My son Alessandro, who is here, will pass around the microphone. If you prefer to come up, then you will, I think at the end, and you're okay with being filmed, that is fine. If you prefer if you feel that you need to be filmed, would like to be filmed, and you're okay with it, but also we might need to get a permission form. But I think the easiest thing is that we pass the microphone to you, and then you speak clearly and loudly and slowly, and then we can proceed with the feedback of what we're hearing. So that's me. So this research and the collection of these stories is part of the Emilio Goggio Chair of Italian Studies at the University of Toronto. All of the research and all of the stories are featured in Transformations Canada. It's a project that critically looks at over 130 years of Italian immigration to Canada. For this research in particular, I worked on 6 stories. So I worked on a story from Saskatchewan at the turn of the century in the 1900s, Italian immigration to Saskatchewan. That was one of the stories. I went far and wide because a lot of people know about our lives here in Toronto, in the Greater Toronto area, Montreal, Ottawa, Vancouver, but how about communities outside of large urban centers? What was their experience about being Italian in Canada? So that was one of the stories featured in Transformations Canada. Another one is St. John's, Newfoundland. there are Italians in St. John's, Newfoundland. So it was wonderful to connect with a leader that's there and get his impressions of what it means to be Italian out in Terre-Neuve in Newfoundland. And then what we'll be focusing on in the next 45 minutes is highlighting Italian immigration to Canada. And all of these people that I spoke to have been in Canada over 10 years and under 20 years. Now, I was very particular about that because, as we know, for any of us that have immigrated, that the period of transition really solidifies and starts to feel a little bit more normal after 10 years. There are a lot of changes that take place within those first 10 years. After 10 years, it's like, okay, maybe this is home. But under 20 years. So actually, most of them are within that time frame in the 21st century. It was very because I had an opportunity to speak to quite a few people that had arrived in the past 5 years, and I said no. When I spoke with them, I could hear that there was still a lot of turmoil, a lot of transition that needed to take place. Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. Okay, so overview. Italians settled in Canada as we know, prior to World War I, and just as many, like my parents, after World War II. Although we are seeing Italian immigration to Canada in much smaller numbers, why are Italians nonetheless choosing to make Canada their new home? And okay, so I already explained about the Italians that that I interviewed were here for more than 10 years. These are the things we're going to be looking at. Before immigrating to Canada, the first years in Canada, from 2005 onwards, Canada is seen through the eyes of Italians, being Italian in Canada, being an immigrant in Canada. How did they feel about being an immigrant in Canada? Those were two separate topics that came up. Italy versus Canada, diversity in Canada, and our final reflections. So what I've done here is I went through all the interviews and I parceled it out according to themes. No human being should be put in a box that this is the theme and this is how their impressions or their feelings were. But for the purpose of today's talk, that is what I've done, but there's a lot of overlap, of course, as human beings when we're experiencing different kinds of emotions. So what we're going to be doing next, before immigrating to Canada. So what I've done, and I hope I can solicit your support, I have pulled impressions of some of what these people have said, and you'll be listening to them. And then once you hear it, then we'll get a chance to perhaps discuss it. There is a Q&A at 5 o'clock to 5:15 from my understanding. And so from 5 to 5:15, it's a formal Q&A, but my style is really all questions are fabulous questions, and I welcome them along the way. So then that means if the conversation goes to 5:15, but we've addressed some of your questions, that is a good thing. So we'll start with before immigrating to Canada. So, John, can I get you to read this passage? You can tell I've known John for a while.
Before immigrating to Canada, I felt that living in Italy was stagnant due to a lack of opportunities and a certain regressive way of thinking. Aesthetically speaking, Italy is a very beautiful country, but it has a lagging economy with precarious employment for many young workers. Opportunities are limited. This creates a general discontent felt by the younger generation. Fabrizio.
Thank you. Anything new there? Have we heard that before? Thank you, Alison. Could everyone hear that in the back? Could you hear, Jenna? You could all hear? Okay. And thank you, John, because of the recording on live stream. So yes, we'll get another impression before immigrating to Canada. Maybe I'll get you, Happy, to. Thank you.
Before emigrating to Canada, why I am now in Canada is a strange story. Canada rained on my brain. I have recently been reading Pinocchio to my children, and I found this expression that I had not heard for a long time, an idea that rained into someone's brain. Well, Canada rained on my brain. I don't know where it came from, this rain. It hit me on the head, and at a certain point I said, I'm going to Canada. Life often chooses for us and not the other way around. Daniele.
Thank you. Thank you, Happy. So quite different, right? One person, one Italian chooses because they felt that perhaps they couldn't see as much of a future for themselves in Italy than they had anticipated. And another one sort of said, you know what? It rained on my brain. I'm going to Canada. And I purposely chose that citation because I loved that the way he explained it, that this image of Canada came to him in his understanding, and then the adventures began. So with both of these people, they did not speak English prior to coming to Canada. It was kind of interesting. That was not an issue that came up in those interviews. The language was not less of an issue, partially maybe because they would have access to English language programs. See,
Gina, just first of all, let me thank you. But an observation before continuing.
yeah,
Do you not think, or perhaps you can explain to me as to why you chose to do it this way? Before doing the readings, do you not think it would have been or could have been better to qualify the subject in the reading in terms of place of origin in Italy, the time when that statement was released, and the age of the subject, and then to proceed with definitions of immigrant and or anything else.
Yeah.
As to that, when that occurred.
Okay, so
I'm just
no, thank you.
In the sort of the theoretical paradigms of these subjects.
That's right, and academia requires us to be very thorough in our research. See, no. So no. But what I'm saying is, the stories that were written, we do cover all of that. I was concerned about the 45-minute time frame to cover 4 very rich narratives from people. Two of the people that I interviewed were gentlemen. The other 2 were women. For regrettably, I'm going to say they were all from northern Italy. I had found participants who I could interview from southern Italy. I felt that would also add another dimension to the research if the people that I was researching were from southern Italy. On the first round, that being this round, they were all from northern Italy. They've all arrived within 2005, 2010, 2012, it all depends. 2 live in Toronto. 1 lived in Ottawa and has recently, in the last few years, moved to Montreal. So do you feel that that's a little bit more information? John and then Bruno?
It probably isn't, but I would add that my cousin's son came from Sicily about 3 or 4 years ago, and for the same reasons of the person that I read. He was educated, but he didn't like what was going on there, and he didn't think there was any potential for economic growth. So even though he came from Sicily, it was the same as a northern.
Yes, because the gentleman the quote that you read, he's just from outside of Rome. So it was Roman further and northern Italians. Yeah. So but that economic reality exists throughout Italy. Yeah, Bruno. Thank you, John. Bruno. Oh, I thought your hand went up again. No.
No. You said that. You said what else? I mean, I would also add the level of education.
Oh, all of them were university educated.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, all of them, and one of them completed a PhD in environmental engineering, but the rest completed undergrad. Yeah. So
Paul was an engineer. Paul, my cousin's son,
see.
Engineering. Also.
Okay, so your cousins, your
University degree.
yeah. So all of these people are educated, right? So, and let's face it, there are Italians who have chosen to go to many countries, and not just Canada's. But for the purpose of this research, we focused on Canada, and I felt so. Because as we know, I know Veronica, you and I sit on the same committee, and you've discussed before in the past that Italians are choosing to leave Italy and going to, England and the UK and other countries. So for the purpose of today's talk, it's strictly Canada. They're crossing the ocean, and why are they choosing to do that? Okay. So let's look at first years in Canada. Anyone interested in reading? Anyone feel comfortable reading? No, thank you. Are you the only non-Italian Canadian here? If you are, bravo. Wow, this is great. I'm looking at you now and I'm thinking, well, thank you for showing up, though. That's great. So the first years in Canada. Okay, so I had these narratives. I interviewed these people, these 4 participants, and I went through all the data. And for the purpose of sort of digesting what they shared with me, I delivered the information this way, and hopefully we can continue to discuss it. Okay, Mel, over to you.
I moved to Canada in 2005. I had met an Italian Canadian, Francesco, from Toronto. After dating a while, we decided to move to Canada, but only after I completed my studies at the University of Florence. Although I did not speak a word of English, it was exciting to be in a new country. It was an immense adaptation for me. Francesco's family was Italian Canadian, but originally from southern Italy. Although we were from the same country, their culture and habits were quite foreign to me. For example, I had a difficult time understanding their dialect. They were traditional in their outlook, and I am not sure what was more foreign to me at the time, being in Canada or being with a family where we shared the same Italian passport. Nevertheless, their lifestyle was quite different. My way of being Italian and their way of being Italian was foreign to me.
Yeah, quite interesting how we have a choir out there. Yeah, for live stream. Yeah, that's right. So interesting how Caterina marries Francesco. They came for love, came to Canada for love, and they settle. And she's not quite sure how to come to terms with the fact that Francesco and his family have an Italian passport. She has an Italian passport, but there's not the disconnect that she had assumed would be the case. So those were some of the first impressions of the first few years in Canada. So any comments on that? Anything that comes to mind? And everyone can hear in the back. Yes, that's great. Okay, so we have another citation about the first. Bruno, I'm going to let you take this. Are you okay with it? See. First years in Canada. You can give that to Bruno.
Thank you. My first years in Canada were difficult. I spent time with people from all over the world. My friends were other immigrants, and that was great. However, by the time their visas would expire, I would circle back to find a new group of friends. I felt connected to these immigrants more than with people born in Toronto because we were going through the same experiences and we felt understood while supporting each other. Generally speaking, what I found was that the less opinionated you are with quote unquote Canadians, the more likely you are of being accepted. Canadians also tend to be rather apologetic. One of the first expressions I learned in Canada was sorry. And the subject is Fabrizio.
See, thank you. So I think most of us would agree that in order to dialogue nicely, politely with Canadians, that we tend to be apologetic. Well, this is what this gentleman said, and that it's true that we often say sorry. So in any event, those were just all four of them have their own interpretations of the first few years. But as I said, I pulled. Okay. Canada is seen through the eyes of Italians. Sandy, are you okay? Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Sandy. Thank you. Yeah, and it's nice to, yeah, and it's.
Initially, my impressions of Canada were that it was cold, distant, quiet, dormant. Canada was small within its geographic vastness. People seemed very comfortable, almost lethargic. When I arrived in Canada in 2012, I remember thinking that I did not like the absence of the piazza in Toronto, and how certain streets went from west to east in a straight line, while other streets went from north to south to complete a grid pattern. Something else I noticed about Toronto was that there seemed to be a lot of older immigrant folks, silently sitting on their porches. So many of them. This was not something I did not like, but rather it was something that left an impression on me. I found it poetically sad. The sadness I felt came from the sense of displacement I think I read in their faces. Perhaps I was just projecting my own displacement onto their faces. Daniele.
Thank you, Sandy. So ever since I interviewed that participant, every time I see people on the front porch, I don't know about you, but we didn't have a cottage. We didn't have, my nonna was my camp out. I went to school with a lot of people that went away to camps. I'm like, no, I'm not going away to camp. My camp is nonna. I'm with her all summer. And we had a front porch, right? And we don't see that as often in certain parts of Toronto. In many urban centers, we've pretty well eliminated the front porch. And but for some people, this is where they can see the other neighbors, other people in the community, and so it's an opportunity to wave. I found the way he expressed himself, that when he saw these immigrants, that was his understanding, that they were immigrants, or maybe he got to know them, that they were spending a lot of time by themselves. And that is something that many of us probably have seen elsewhere, and we know it's an epidemic in the Western world, this sense of isolation and loneliness. And the way he captured it, I appreciated that, and the way he had said that. Any comments on what we heard here about the piazza? There's no piazza, but there is meaning. Huh? The porch can be a piazza, Happy. That's right. Did you hear what was said here? The porch is the piazza. Yes, it brings people together. When I used to sit on the porch, now we do not have a porch where I live. But when I used to sit on the porch, I can guarantee that I knew most of my neighbors. Yeah, actually, that's a really good point.
Absolutely. And it's a bit of a travesty.
Yeah.
I have neighbors that I barely know.
Yeah.
After 18 years of living there, although the porch somehow still connects us to some of them.
And you have a porch.
And I'll never
get rid of it.
Never.
Makes me think I should put a chair or two on my little porch and wave at everybody.
It wasn't so much the porch,
and life goes on, and communities change. So I still have a porch, but it has some grandmother. So it's not a concept.
Yes.
It's a porch.
Yes, and happy, I think you're saying is it used to be a piazza, our makeshift notion of a piazza. Is that
It translated,
Yeah,
absolutely.
at that time?
Still does to some extent because
Mm-hmm.
we don't have the same here,
Yeah,
right?
in this day and age. Yeah, yeah. Bruno. Oh, okay. I thought you were waving. Yes, sir. What is your name? Alessio.
Paradoxically, I find that there's several communities in Northern Ontario, or even though they're smaller communities, the people who live there are much closer to one another.
Mm.
There's this friend of mine who's got a house in Bangkok, and it's incredible up there because every time I go and I step, out of the house, I'm greeted by people. In Toronto, there's this sense it's become such a place where people don't trust one another.
Mm.
Where stepping out on the streets and say hi to someone could result in bigger consequences or like bad situations, and therefore the people have lost this sense of trust in one another. But I guess the further you go from Toronto, the more you find that.
Yeah.
So it's a very individual, I guess, mechanism that applies to different parts of Ontario, but with different rules, I guess, or different sets of rules.
Yes, Alessio, I agree with you. And I think that what many of us might be feeling might be that big city feeling. And as soon as we leave the big city, that there's more opportunity to connect. Yes, thank you, Alessio. Now, I want to make sure, Daniele, that you were able to capture Happy and Gianna and Alessio's comments. Okay, only. Okay, so we're going to make sure when you have a question that Alessandro brings the mic to you, because all the people that are live streaming, we want to make sure that they can hear what you have to say as well. Okay, I have another citation. Veronica. Grazie.
Canada, as seen through the eyes of Italians. I tell Italians that there are many opportunities if they want to move to Canada. Not me. However, the pace of life is quite different here because I find Canadians put far too much focus on their careers, and it can be quite a competitive environment. For example, I currently see the pressure regarding the high school my daughter should eventually attend because it will facilitate who she would meet, and meeting the right people is important. In Canada, 2-hour lunches or an aperitivo after work is not what you do. And forget about meeting for coffee on the same day that you suggested. It just won't happen. Canadians are not very spontaneous, but let me say that even my Italian friends who are now living in Canada, including myself, are now less spontaneous. Ironically, when I return to Italy to visit family, I become impatient when we don't have dinner early or when plans are vague. So I guess, in a way, I'm becoming more Canadian. Gaia.
Thank you, Veronica. So there's a shift happening there, right? This notion that we have of Italians, a spontaneity. Let's go for a cafe. Let's go for a drink. Sure, yeah, and how the Italians living here in Canada are making that transition. That maybe they're programmed in becoming increasingly programmed, like many of us here. Any comments on what Veronica read from? Okay. Okay. Professor Luca.
Being Italian in Canada. If I have to be honest, there's only one thing that makes me feel homesick. Everything. I actually don't know how to answer this because home has become such a complicated concept that I'm not able to formulate an answer. Immigration is so intimate and solitary that it moves something deep within you that is almost secretive and unspeakable. Sometimes it is an invisible mutation. My face is the same, but something invisible has grown inside of me. My friends who knew me before I left Italy have frozen in their brain and heart an image of me locked in time. However, my deepest internal changes are invisible to them. And this is Daniele.
Yeah, yeah. It's so we change inside, but the face on the outside, we still look like we're the same person. Thank you, Professor Samili. Thank you, David. Oh no, you're the other one that's not Italian Canadian. You and Mel. Yeah.
I soon learned after my arrival.
So, sorry, can you start again?
Sure, yeah. I soon learned after my arrival about North America's obsession with movies like The Godfather, which painted Italians as mafia gangsters. I was always being asked if I was one of them or if I had a gun. I quickly realized it was widely acceptable to mock Italian accents and hand gestures learned through movies or trips abroad. This is when I learned what it meant to be an quote unquote invisible minority. Despite this reality, I believe that Italian immigrants have it easy compared to other ethnicities. Canada may be diverse, but I believe that there is still a way to go to truly value the many cultures that are here in Canada. Fabrizio.
Thank you, David. So yes, they are an invisible minority, and these are terms that are being thrown around quite a bit. When 51% of Torontonians were born outside of the country, and the 5 immigrant receiving countries that in Canada are from India, China, Philippines, Nigeria, and the Pakistan. Those are visible minorities, and then what ends up happening is they're the visible minorities, and there's a flip, right? That now that minority, that whole notion of minority. But interesting how this participant, regardless of all of the derogatory stereotypes about Italians that he had to face, that he felt that his adaptation as a minority, as an immigrant, was more manageable than other immigrants, because he worked with many when he first arrived in Canada. Any feedback? Okay, we'll continue. So, okay, a bit of an extension. Alessandro, you're going to read that?
No, I had a question.
Oh, go ahead.
So, what does being what does it mean, the being an invisible minority? Because you could also argue that the Italian community is not an invisible minority. Just for example, all the Italian community centers, the Italian restaurants, people know a lot more about the Italian culture than, let's say, other cultures or non-Canadian culture. So is invisible minority strictly in terms of the color of their skin?
Initially, that was how it was differentiated. Yeah, that is the identifiable feature, is the color of someone's skin. Yeah, yeah, and that's changing in the GTA, as we know. Yeah. So, good question. Thank you. So, so being an immigrant in Canada. Takers? Alessio? Thank you. As long as you did speak nicely before, just with the microphone. Thank you, Alessio.
Food is very interesting, innovative, and variable in Canada, and coffee is better than you would expect. If there is someone I can engage with intellectually, I tell them that there is no Canada per se, but there are as many Canadas as there are inhabitants. If someone wants to make Canada their home, it depends on what their goals are. If they want to have an aperitif life, in other words, live a carefree life sipping Aperol Spritz on a beach in Italy, then they should just stay in Italy. If they want to blow up their lives and flourish into a new form of themselves, or if they want to work, or are ready to question their knowledge, relearn things, choose a less round and a little more square kind of life, then by all means choose Canada. Round is a smooth, pleasing and gentle shape, but often purposeless. Square is firm, organized, and orderly. For an Italian spirit, round is the inclination, like the round hills of Tuscany. Square is an aspiration, difficult to reach and most always rational, much like the squared grid pattern created by Toronto streets. Daniela.
Yeah. Round is, that's quite, thank you, Alessio. It's quite something. The metaphor that's used here about the life of Italians, it's very circular, very round. There's, I mean, his interpretation, it's not square, it's not focus, it's not moving forward in the direction of moving forward like it is in Canada. Because my question to him is, what are your impressions about living in Italy vis-a-vis living in Canada? And what do you remember of your life there, and now your life here in the last 15 years or so? So, any comments on what we just heard? See. Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Just so people can hear
on live stream.
Yeah. Was it a deliberate choice on your part to keep on using the term immigrant throughout? Now, after I don't know how many declarations we've heard.
Yeah.
But you're still qualifying them as immigrants in the traditional sense of the word, unless we clearly identify the changing nature of how we associated immigrants with the traditional set of or steps of the immigrant journey and the difficulty. These people, especially with the latest tool with the use of metaphors, is clearly educated. So why have you chosen to still use the term immigrant and not expat or opportunity seekers in movement of capital throughout any industrialized nation?
Right. Okay. Thank you, Bruno, for your question. My questions were very open-ended. I had about 20 questions. Some and if the word immigrant came up, it is their choice that it came up. It was not in my questions. Now, what I would say is, in order to categorize this for a talk this afternoon, I needed to group according to certain themes. So if they consider themselves expat, that adjective was never in their discourse in the interviews. So, and I would say that they came in search of a different kind of opportunity, but none of the people that I interviewed the opportunity was to have a different kind of life, not that they would have, they came already relatively settled and wealthy. No, they came for a different kind of life, either for love, as I mentioned, to get away from the reality of what Italy could not provide them, and because it rained on his brain, and he wanted to come and discover what Canada could be. But the word immigrant, it was strictly for the purpose, Bruno, of today's conversation. But no. Yeah, no. I appreciate.
It's obviously what I'm saying. I don't believe that today.
Yeah.
Or in the past, since without getting into in the recent past, there is no such thing as immigrant between industrial societies, and what we're getting from Italy, they're not quote unquote immigrants. For
Okay.
my own.
Yes. Okay.
For my own.
Go ahead, Veronica. Thank you, Bruno.
Strictly speaking, if you move to a country as an expat, as a specific definition, you are sent by a company, and you are therefore in a very privileged situation, and also you're planning on going back or to another country. But if you're immigrating, that means you decide to move with the idea of possibly not returning. So, for example, as part of my career, I'm an expat. but I'm not an immigrant. But I have friends that came already now 10, 15, some 20 years ago with the intent of remaining. Or maybe they decided, maybe I want to go back, but then in the end, so they are immigrants. They immigrated in the country. And now they're also basically Canadian. So I think there's really a difference between expat and an immigrant.
I'm fully aware of that. For lack of a better term, that's why I use expat. And I know exactly what you're saying in terms of having a package as quote unquote an economic package to look after you in terms of career aspiration. But for lack of a better word, I'm using expat as someone who is looking for opportunity, and the product, the initial product that migrates as a movement from one nation to another is not, and it's different from the traditional component of that immigrant in terms of the Italian diaspora. That is my qualification. Well, I think so. But we can certainly discuss it.
Well, that's why we're here, and that's what I understand. We will have a nice reception at 5:15, where I'm hoping we will all have an opportunity to continue this discussion. So, okay, so I am going to continue. Okay, so Jana, are you okay with? Thank you, Jana. Yes, yeah.
And what a reader.
I just learned that.
Yeah, it's yeah.
Okay, being an immigrant in Canada. Oh, subject I love. Nostalgia hits me when I go back to Italy and when I land in a new place. I am familiar with this pain, the pain of the coming and the going. Your new land, even if welcoming, is not the place where your roots are. At the same time, your land of origin is a land from which you have uprooted yourself. Your space then becomes the marginal space between the two places. This is Daniele.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Gianna.
Sorry for jumping in just like that. Even in this day and age of WhatsApp and social media, where you no longer have to make brief phone calls because they cost $20 to talk 5 minutes, that pain is still so present and so poignant, Gianna. I thought it came across, wow, still today. Only still like today. 10 years ago, you can still feel that the way it was felt 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago.
Yeah. Thank you. Happy I agree. Italy versus Canada. We just have a few more citations before we have final reflections and Q&A. So any takers on reading? There's a few gentlemen here that I haven't met this afternoon. Would anyone like to read? Thank you, sir. Italy versus Canada. So this was very open-ended. This was a question. Can you tell me your impressions? You see how there's a lot of overlapping, a lot of meshing. We're human beings. We're thinking and feeling a lot of things at once when we're participating in these kinds of discussions. But once again, for the purpose of being here today, I've tried to categorize them this way. And what is your name?
Paolo.
Paolo. Yes, you introduced yourself, Paolo, when you came in. Thank you.
Okay. Italians are quite accepting of dysfunctional bureaucracies and inefficiencies. When you live in a country where things generally run smoothly, like in Canada, and then return to Italy, I find that I'm less tolerant. Italians, especially those who have not traveled abroad, tend to complain about the government, the taxes, and inefficiencies, but they rarely take action to demand improvements. In Canada, I feel that we have a say and that citizens feel more empowered to demand positive changes. Something else I find interesting about Canada is that there is a strong culture of fundraising, of charity giving, and volunteer work. Canadians offer their time and money, while in Italy, historically and culturally, we tend to expect the government to take care of those aspects of society. I appreciate that students here are required to perform service hours, which gives them a sense of community and the importance of helping others in need. And this was Gaia.
Yeah, thank you, Paolo. Yeah, so they, when they've lived most of their life in Italy, the last 15, 20 years, they're feeling relatively okay about comparison. That was an open-ended question that I asked. Tell me about your impressions of Italy. Tell me about your impressions of Canada. So that was another example. This is quite short. Italy versus Canada. Sir, there you go, Alessandro, thank you. Another example of the.
Thank you. Canada is a place where everybody can be themselves. In Italy, there is still a very discriminatory culture against the women, immigrants, and frankly, anything that is different. There is a resistance to what is different to us. For me, it is very important to be living in a place where women are not formally discriminated against. Caterina.
So, as a woman professional, she feels that she'd like to stay in Canada because she feels that her life is more equitable. She has much more opportunity. And if you pull up on the website Transformations Canada, all of these people that I've interviewed, all of their narratives are on the website, and you can follow her trajectory of why she feels that there was just more opportunity here for her. And she felt that when she works hard, she's recognized. Not all the, this is not a perfect country, but this is her interpretation as a woman. Okay, final one. Diversity in Canada. Diversity in Canada. Thank you. What is your name?
Valentina.
Valentina. Thank you, Valentina.
Diversity in Canada. When faced with challenges as an immigrant, it is easy to compare the best part of our native country with the host country, instead of being grateful for what it has given us, such as a quote-unquote better quality of life within the standards of contemporary society. Every country has their pros and cons. Some of us are not fully aware of the extensions of the privilege we have, especially as quote-unquote white people, to easily enter a land like Canada and to use it as our own land of opportunity. Fabrizio.
So it's an extension of what was said about the invisible minority. And it's a land of opportunity, the brave new world, right? Thank you. Thank you, Valentina. And last one before we have final reflections. Any takers? Are you okay? What is your name? Olivia. Thank you, Olivia. Thank you.
I did not know about Toronto's multiculturalism before I arrived. Or better said, I didn't really understand the dimensions of Toronto's multiculturalism before I got here. I had heard about it, but I did not understand it. When I lived it, I understood its dimension and was impressed when hearing Prime Minister Trudeau call Canada the first post-national site in the world. Daniele.
Yeah. So thank you. Thank you, Olivia. So those are just some ideas about their impressions about diversity in Canada, right? It's something that there's resistance in Italy about the diversity, and there's a stronger feeling, notion, reality of us and them. We still have it here in Canada, but not to the same extent as what you're seeing in Italy, and in most countries, actually, not just Italy, as we know. So they were astounded by the diversity in this country, and that initially when they arrived, they had Italian friends, and then they would branch out beyond that, which I think has happened for many of us, that we can have friends from all over the world, right? Any questions on that before, Gianna?
I'm wondering. Thank you. I got a loud voice. You can hear me without this. I was wondering, who were these? Were these students that you interviewed?
Oh,
these people. Yes.
Yeah. So they're all they've all arrived within the last 15, 20 years. They're all university educated, 2 men, 2 women. They're all from northern Italy. None, I was not able to identify people from southern Italy, although I did, and I wasn't able to continue the research, but hopefully, who knows, maybe their impressions might be different than the ones from northern Italy, but they're all university educated.
So you put out a call for people to, or I mean, I was thinking you went to a university and got a classroom full of people and said, okay, let me interview you.
It was really, I actually have to say quite a few people declined. Quite a few Italians declined.
I'm not surprised.
Neither am I. It comes through on the narratives.
Right. Okay.
That they declined. They did not want to be part of, maybe, I don't know. Anyway, they, but it was through word of mouth. I'm interviewing. Do you know anyone? I'm interviewing. I'm looking for research subjects, participants for this research. But as I said, and you're right that you came in, as I said, all the people that I spoke to needed to be here more than 10 years, Jana, because there is that period of transition, the first few years, like, what am I doing here? Why am I here? I don't like it. It's cold. Everyone else is cold. No one's nice in Canada. You know, I wasn't looking for that kind of response. I was looking for a much more tempered, reflective response on, okay, well, I'm here now. These are my reasons. But that usually happens after those first 10 years of I'm going to say turmoil a little bit, emotional turmoil, and that they're questioning a little bit about why they may be here. But these people have all been here more than 10 years. Yeah.
Okay.
So,
thank you.
Yeah. So, final reflections. How are we doing on time? Okay, we've just got a few minutes but I'm glad to hear the questions. I miss Italy for certain things. I miss the system or I miss knowing the system well, or the familiarity of the culture, and I miss the comfort that comes with that. I miss my chosen family and friends because I'm an only child. I try to go to Italy 2 to 3 times a year. Canada is safe. Canada is a secure place. There are no wars here. For professional Italians, many see Canada as an ideal place for these reasons. The average Italian does not know much about Canada. This is her understanding, unless they have a particular connection to the country. If anyone wants to move here, they ask about job prospects and the quality of life. Italians like Italy. They're comfortable there. Day to day, the quality of life is comfortable. It's good. The weather, the architecture, the fresh ingredients, the food, it's all good. I felt it was important to provide this other perspective, that there's many beautiful things that they've had to leave behind, right? And we know, any comments on this final reflection? We've got a few here. Yeah. Yeah.
That does not apply. I just came back from Italy and speaking to a lot of the students there, and I did some interviews and stuff. This is not the attitude that a lot of people have, but it's nice to read.
Maybe she feels that way because now she's in Canada, right? Right. And yeah, that's right. And David, did you have your?
Yeah, ideal country, at least this is what my father would say, even he's been here for like 50 years, is still in his imagination, is a blend of 2 countries. And sometimes it's more than that if you've had other countries as part of your life history. And so when I read this, and I take what Jenna's saying at face value, I find that a lot of them
of both.
I read this, and maybe I'm reading too much into it, but that's what I hear, and that's also what I, in some of the other readings.
That's right.
Again, I'm not an expert on immigrant literature or the experience of immigrants. I'm not an immigrant, but that's just my
Yeah. Yes. I think a lot of immigrant literature would reflect some of that reality that certainly also your father has felt. Yeah. One thing in particular that makes me sad about Canada is the erosion of human relationships and how accelerated it is in this country. Perhaps I should specify in a large urban center like Toronto. It goes back a little bit to what you had said, Bancroft versus the GTA. Through my director's lens, this is what I see. A still image, an elevator in an apartment building with people enclosed in their headphones. No eye contact. Each person has a dog. A resemblance of affection bought at the pet store. Wow. Okay. And I think a lot of people love their dogs. Okay. The door opens and everyone enters their unit. Their door remains shut until someone brings their app purchased dinner. That someone will not knock on the door, but will notify the customer of the delivery on the app. That is, in his eyes, he lives in Toronto with his family. The erosion of human relationships. I think it's getting, in a big city, it's getting harder and harder to connect. That's how come I'm so appreciative that you're here this afternoon. Thank you so much for making the time to be with us and to connect on a number of different levels and around ideas. It's always refreshing, and which is great. I can be who I am in Canada. That is my experience. The social pressure to fit in a socially accepted box is not as prevalent in Canada. I am nostalgic for Italy, but I am not sure if that is enough for me to go back permanently. Canada offers you a place to live where you are paid fairly for your work, where there's less social discrimination, and it is a more open society. And I'll share the last final reflection because it's 5:15, right? And we need to move on. Okay, I wanted to leave you with this image. For me, emigrating was worth the effort, even if there isn't the architectural beauty, the art history. There is breathtaking beauty in Canadian nature, in the Rockies, for example, and the vast ocean coastlines. The food may not always be fresh, but the different cultural cuisines make up for it. Personally, for me, the Canadian Rockies are equivalent to the Sistine Chapel. Wow. Okay, it's just a different kind of extraordinarily unimaginable beauty. I wanted to leave you with that thought. That they are. Thank you. Thank you.
So it is breathtaking after all.
Canada.
No, yeah, but I'm saying there it says first, even the art history.
Yes.
Beauty in Canadian nature in the Rockies.
I couldn't
believe if it isn't the architectural beauty, but it's still beauty.
Yes.
As long as you own it, then it's yours. And it's beautiful.
I just when I interviewed her and she said, the Rockies, and she sort of looks, she goes, the Rockies are like the Sistine Chapel. And then I actually had to make sure it was still recording because I appreciated her saying that. Not because I'm Canadian, but anyone that has seen the Rockies, it's hard to compare it with other places in the world, personally myself. And so it's unimaginably beautiful. The Sistine Chapel and the Rockies. Okay, final comment? No.
This is perfect for what I wonder if a traditional, I hate to do it that way, but an immigrant, a post-World War II immigrant from rural Italy would have known the Sistine Chapel and the Canadian Rockies enough in order to come up with these analogs. That was my point.
Yes, and my point is the reason why I did this research is because the life that my parents led as for a Second World War, post-Second World War immigrants had to be different than what was happening now. And I wanted to understand better what those differences were instead of me imagining that those differences existed. My parents barely finished elementary school. Yes, all of us are here in a university setting. If they were here, they'd be horribly uncomfortable. Not that that is something that they should be feeling that comfortable, but it's so out of their personal point of reference. So the reason why I did this research is what is happening with Italians that are choosing to come here or leave Italy, and how are they feeling about those choices they've made? And yes, they have the disposable income to go to the Rockies, and because, as I said to you, these people live in northern Italy, to appreciate the Sistine Chapel. We know this. Post-war immigrants, they didn't necessarily read books. They didn't have the education or access to books. It was always labor intensive. It was always to make a mark, not necessarily in Canada, but for their families. And so that is how, so I'm glad you raised it, but that is the real reason why I chose to do this research, is because I wanted to understand. It's like the first quote you heard. Same passports from Italy, but their impressions and their understanding of it is quite different when she married someone from southern Italy. So I'm afraid we need to go, right?
We can continue the conversation downstairs with we have a small reception downstairs, so
Yeah.
we can certainly continue the conversation there.
Yes, thank you, Alessio. I saw your hand, but can I take Alessio's question and then we're off? Alessio. Oh. Okay, go ahead, Alessio.
There's just this saying in Italy that goes, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. I think that Italians struggle with self-criticism, meaning that what's beautiful in our country is the culture, the food, the fashion aspect. Most of the luxury cars that are produced worldwide, Lamborghini, Ferrari, those are all things that belong to our culture and we're proud of. But I wish there was a little more self-criticism in terms of the things that do not work or that need some work, such as social issues and things like that. But instead, it's almost like the upper class of Italian society lives in a bubble. They're not willing to confront what's wrong with us. They're not willing to say, this is wrong. We're going to talk about it. That was just a comment that I had. But, I am in love with both worlds. And I personally, I'm so happy of being here. But I know that there are differences in terms of the social aspect. And to this day, I feel like there's a lot of people that I know from Italy that came here after high school. And it's incredibly hard for them to adapt when there's no friends, there's no people, that surround them, no people that they can rely on, except for the few members of their family. It's really hard. Mm-hmm. But I definitely relate to a lot of the stories we heard today, and fantastic presentation. Thank you so much.
Alessio. Thank you, Professor Somigli.
Thank you for coming. Join me in thanking again Gina for a stimulating conversation. And as I said, we'll
on the second floor.
Downstairs and
join us downstairs. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Gina.